I mean, I'm a writer, I'm a researcher, and you know, I can find the information where I need and when I need it. And in recent times I've been seriously going into quantum science, quantum theory, particularly the work of the theoretical physicist David Bohm, who was onto the whole idea of multidimensional experiences in connection with the medium that we call plasma. That's suggesting that the fourth dimension is a separate place, like the Earth or our physical dimension is a place that exists and you can travel from A to B. I think what you've referred to as the fourth dimension is something that's created as and when necessary. In other words, the dimensions beyond the three normal space and one of time uncurl into existence when necessary. So cutting edge work's going on at the moment seems to suggest that we might be looking at quite separate life forms existing within plasma environments. Now, where do they come from if they suddenly just exist? Well, I think that they're interpenetrating through the plasma from something that's beyond normal space-time, some kind of higher dimensional realm. And I say that this might sound completely, you know, new age or cookie, but it's not.
Hi, I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I am here with Andrew Collins, and we are at Megalithomania in South Africa, and I'm very happy to be able to interview Andrew. I've been trying to catch up with him for quite some time, and we're going to have some thunderstorm activity in the background, so if you hear rolling thunder, you know what's going on, and it's all good. And so, what I'd like to do here is, Andrew, have you sort of give yourself an introduction and talk about what brought you into this whole subject area. Really go back to your, even your childhood if necessary, and give us a little personal background.
Well, I think I probably began my interest with UFOs when I was a child. I had an interest in aircraft, and I saw a strange ball of light across the sky one day, and I thought that this was perhaps even more interesting than the aircraft that I was trying to view and spot at that time. And so I started to read what I could, and as a child there wasn't that much around, and then other interests took over my life, and it wasn't until I started work at the age of 16 that I started gorging paperbacks on UFOs from the likes of Brad Steiger, Jack Valley, John Keel, people like this. And it sort of almost took over my life, really, because I wanted to get close to the subject. I wanted to, to communicate with these entities. And so I became a UFO investigator for the British UFO Research Association, started interviewing people that had seen things. And that's where it all began. And very quickly I realised, obviously, that 90% of UFO sightings have some kind of explanation. But those that didn't were very, very interesting, because the people involved in them seem to have certain characteristics that are similar to each other, not just personalities, but they often seem to be psychic, they often seem to have physiological traits in common, they would have past lives that were quite similar, and I started to look more at this than the actual phenomena itself, because I felt that the people were the key to the phenomena as much as what they were seeing. And as all this was taking place, the type of cases I was covering were getting more and more involved, close encounters at first, close encounters of the second kind, and finally close encounters of the third kind, and even fourth. And until eventually, in 1977, when I was aged 20, I was lucky enough to be put in touch with the first ever witnesses to an abduction in the UK. And this was a family by the name of Day, D-A-Y, from West Essex, so that's just outside of Greater London. And they were going along a road at night, short journey, they saw an oval blue light crossing in front of them, and they saw this, accepted it was a UFO, it disappeared, and then they turned the corner and the car headlights failed, they could no longer hear the tyres, the engine failed, and in front of them there's this luminous bank of green mist, glowing green mist, and they ploughed into that and everything went completely hazy. The next thing they know, they're 3/4 of a mile further along the road, and they get home from this short journey and find that 3 hours are missing from their lives. The whole case was investigated over about a year-long period, and the standard on-board scenario came out during hypnosis, and this really sort of set the standard in the UK. I mean, before that time, it was only really foreign cases like Betty and Barney Hill, and a guy called, I think it was Herb Schreimer, in 1974, and that happened in the USA. Plus, there was a few really strange cases, obviously from South America, and this really primed me. I think this was at the point that I really started to write about UFOs, and I also realised that there was a paranormal or psychic element here, because the family changed dramatically after the encounter. They became vegetarians, could start seeing auras, could see energies out of sight, also strange apparitions, tall dark figures seen at night. And I can confirm that this was real, because on more than one occasion I saw poltergeist activity, or heard it I should say, going on when I was on my own in their downstairs one night, sleeping overnight there.
So you actually went there to investigate?
Yeah, but I became very close friends with them as well, and I'm still friends with the male of the family, John, day to day. And there's no question this event took place, and that I started to try and get deeper into this, because the onboard experience was quite classic, but there seemed to be some conflicting things going on, because the family had 3 children. 2 of them were asleep in the car, and the third one, when he saw the oval blue light, got up and held on to the front seats, and that's the position he was in when they went into the green mist. He was still in that position when they came out. The 2 other children were still asleep in the back. It was as if time had disappeared completely. So in other words, it didn't seem as if they'd spent 3 hours somewhere. The whole thing had happened in an instant of time. That's not to say they didn't have an abduction experience. That occurred, but it occurred outside of normal space-time. And this got me thinking that maybe the abduction experiences may be a lot more complex than the simple idea that you've got a nuts and bolts spacecraft and somebody goes aboard and they're then put back afterwards. That you're dealing here with something that's completely out of space and out of time. And that is something that I've tried to get a grip on in various books that I've written, and I'm doing a brand new book now, nearly completed, called Light Quest, which is all about this very subject.
Okay, so in a sense you're really dealing with dimensions.
Absolutely.
Aren't you?
Yeah.
And I wonder, as a result of this, whether you have any background in physics, or, in other words, do you have some kind of background? Do you have any military background?
No, I have none at all. I mean, I'm a writer, I'm a researcher, and I can find the information where I need and when I need it. And in recent times I've been seriously going into quantum science, quantum theory, particularly the work of the theoretical physicist David Bohm, who was onto the whole idea of multidimensional experiences in connection with the medium that we call plasma. And this has been a word that has been bandied around in connection with UFOs for a very long time. And in fact, it's almost like a dirty word within ufology, because unfortunately, it was given as the alternative explanation, like this is not a real alien encounter, this is a plasma, and people would say no, it's not, and it was almost used in the same way that swamp gas was used to explain will-o'-the-wisps and jack-o'-lanterns, the old terms for balls of light in the past. But I do believe that it is a key to understanding UFOs and multi-dimensional experiences.
But you're using the notion of plasma. I think
Yeah.
when you're talking about plasma, you're actually relating to what the sort of old-fashioned notion of the ether.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, but the ether itself is not the manifestation of plasma. I mean, plasma is essentially seas of electrons excited, giving off photons that create light. And these are bound and held together by electrostatic charges and magnetic fields. And they call these buoyant plasmas or plasmoids. And again, this is not new. I mean, loads of people have suggested this relationship, and I think most people accept that they have something to do with UFOs. But I'm going further. I'm saying that a lot of abduction cases, I can't explain all of them, of course, no one can, are actually multi-dimensional experiences where people enter into what I call a bubble universe. In other words, they get too close to these objects. They first enter what I call a shifted reality, something that Jenny Randles refers to as the Oz factor, where everything starts going wobbly and weird around you, but you're still in your normal environment. And then at a certain point in the encounter, you are just taken completely out of space-time. And if anybody was at that spot in between times, nothing, they wouldn't see anything, or they might see a light or something like this, but they wouldn't see the whole thing. In fact, there's a good chance they wouldn't see anything whatsoever.
Okay, what about the notion that what you're talking about is, because what I've heard is, especially perhaps with the gray encounters,
yeah.
That people are taken into the fourth dimension, literally that particular dimension, which is extremely horizontal.
Yeah. That's suggesting that the fourth dimension is a separate place, like the Earth or our physical dimension is a place that exists and you can travel from A to B. I think what you've referred to as a fourth dimension is something that's created as and when necessary. In other words, the dimensions beyond the three normal space and one of time uncurl into existence when necessary, so that the interaction between our consciousness, our mind, and other intelligences which are truly alien in nature create this relationship, and these intelligences use the plasma as a medium for this interaction, this inner penetration into our physical world. And yes, absolutely, the witnesses, the victims, the contactees are taken into this fourth dimension realm where the actual event takes place. I mean, Travis Walton, 1975, logger in the southern United States, comes too close to an object, gets zapped, disappears for a period of days, eventually is found wandering about. His memory of actually being away lasts no more than a couple of hours at the most. And this was a great mystery which to this day he can't understand, because where was he for the rest of that time? And I think the answer is, well, he was wherever he was, because he was outside normal space-time, so time is not running in the same way. There's something different going on here. He's in a created realm, a created environment, which is based upon his own mind, the knowledge that the intelligences have, and something in between, which is probably drawn from the collective unconscious. You know, what we have today is UFO encounters, alien abductions. What we had in the past was fairy encounters, or if you were a Christian, you know, trips to paradise, visions of Jesus Christ, or even on other occasions, perhaps people being dragged down to hell and being tortured by demons. Some of the accounts of that are very, very similar to what we call alien abductions today.
Okay, but I mean, there's a number of questions I have as a result of what you're saying.
Yeah.
One of the things that comes to mind, having just heard your presentation, is, however, though, that the notion of the Anunnaki, which had come in to a lot of the Egyptian information, but also into, and I don't even know how to pronounce it, the recent investigations you've been doing in Turkey, at that site, which again, and then of course Sumer, and the Sumerian tablets, all relate to a race that came from the stars.
According to Zecharia Sitchin, of course. I mean, I have to be totally honest, I'm not a big fan of Zecharia Sitchin and his interpretation of the ancient text.
Okay, but from earth, from heaven to earth came.
Yeah.
This is an interpretation.
Yeah, my idea of the Anunnaki are completely separate. I wrote a book in 1996 called From the Ashes of Angels, where I read the ancient text, or at least read all of the translations that were available at that time. And I mean, we're not talking about just modern, boring, staid ones, but ones from the past, the 1910s, 1920s. I got all of the original material. I even learned Hebrew so that I could read these and read all the characters. And these talk about the Anunnaki being virtually a physical race of individuals, let's call them that existed in a physical sense. And it says that they lived in a mountain-like retreat, something like a kibbutz of Israeli, tradition today, and that they were removed from the mortal world, but they would interact with it. And this world was seen to be somewhere in the north. It was a place where the cedar forests were, and although they are most obviously associated with Lebanon today, there were huge cedar forests to the north of the area of Sumer and Akkad and Babylon and Syria. And this was the area of the Taurus Mountains. And this is the area where Göbekli Tepe is in southeast Turkey. Göbekli Tepe being the oldest stone temple complex in the world. And from my research, I concluded that the Anunnaki was another name for these individuals called the Watchers of the Book of Enoch, whose offspring was the Nephilim, and that these two were these same incredible beings, which I felt were flesh and blood, that existed in the past and were said to have given the arts and sciences of heaven to humankind. To me, these guys were born on this earth.
But what about the line that says they came from a planet called Nibiru?
Well, that's, again, the work of Zecharia Sitchin. Now, Zecharia Sitchin died last year. There's a lot coming out to suggest that some of his translations of the ancient texts are not as they should be. And I read The 12th Planet, which is a great book, directly after I finished work on From the Ashes of Angels. It gets a very brief mention at the end of it. And in my opinion, his translation of those same texts that I'd been looking at were completely wrong. And, you know, that's a personal opinion, but I happen to know that various of my colleagues share that opinion.
Sure.
They also looked at those. In other words, they don't talk about the Anunnaki coming from other planets. You know, they talk about them as a race, a community of beings which appear to be flesh and blood, or appear to be immortal. Now, what immortal means is up to the individual. I see it as living across generations, at a time when most other people would probably have had a lifespan of maybe 30 or 40. Perhaps these guys live for 100, you know, the same way we do today, or maybe even longer. Obviously, there's a lot of traditions to do with biblical figures, patriarchs living across hundreds of years. Perhaps that's what these guys were doing. They were immortals. But I believe myself they were flesh and blood.
Okay, but would you acknowledge that they were also very, very tall?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, all of the texts suggest that, you know, they talk about them as tall as trees, giants, and certainly their offspring were giants. And what that obviously means is that, you know, as far as human offspring, they were of large size, and there are some quite disturbing stories about women having to undergo caesarean section to remove the babies because, you know, their birth canals were just, you know, too narrow for the child to come out. Okay,
what about Akhenaten and Nefertiti and that the notion that they might have been from another planet?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's something that I can't really handle. I mean, the original ideas for this probably come from the fact that they're depicted with extremely long faces. And this same idea of long faces is there with the Watchers as related in the Book of Enoch.
But it's more than long faces, it's elongated
Absolutely,
skulls.
elongated heads.
Yeah, and they have found skulls like that.
Yes, they have.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, for the most part, those skulls are deformed using bands on a child, on a baby, on a child when they're young. This is a practice that was going on all the way around the world, in the ancient world and in the Americas, certainly from as far back as any knowledge we have of human civilization, right the way through. And in fact, I think it still goes on amongst certain tribal cultures even today. But of course, we've all seen these great skulls from places like Peru and Mexico. But it was also going on in the ancient Near East, the very area where I suggest that the Watchers and the Anunnaki were. Similar skulls have been found there, and there are various papers have been done on them. And what's interesting is that although the skulls have definitely been bound in the same way as a lot of other deformed skulls have done in other parts of the world, what's interesting is that the skulls seem to be elongated anyway. So in other words, all they're doing is accentuating something that's already there. Now, why would they do that? And I think it's because these skulls and the deformation process only went on amongst an elite, amongst the shamans, the priests, who themselves were a caste that stretches back many thousands of years, and perhaps through interbreeding and the rest of it with other races and peoples, they were beginning to lose their original appearance, an appearance which even themselves they saw in terms of extremely long skulls. And I find this really interesting because this matches exactly the descriptions as given of the Watchers, and the great line in one of the Enochian texts is that their face was, or their visage actually sort of says in one translation, is like that of a viper. And what does this mean? Well, think of the Viper Room, the great jazz club in the United States. Where did that get its name? Well, I'll tell you, and this is what gave me the clue. Because the jazz musicians would play on stage at night, the people in the audience and obviously the musicians would be smoking joints, and all of the smoke would completely distort people's faces, and it would make their faces look as if they were extremely long as they were playing, the trumpets and whatever, and it almost seemed as if they were like vipers on stage because their faces, and it was this piece of information that started to tell me what a face like a viper or their description as serpents actually meant, that their whole face were elongated, very much like those faces of Akhenaten, very much like those deformed skulls that we see. Now, I can't explain every deformed skull, of course. I mean, I've seen pictures of some very peculiar ones. So I wouldn't like to say that every single one's got an obvious explanation. Some are obviously medical conditions, and others I can't explain. But definitely around the world have been bound children, and they've turned out to be very strange-looking individuals.
Okay, but to get back to this notion of this sort of multidimensionality of the UFO experience, and not to completely leave behind the idea of the Anunnaki, because what we're talking about here is, if you say a multidimensional experience, and you're also talking about, because we have massive amounts of evidence that there are nuts and bolts craft, that have been photographed and that are visiting and that are also being reverse engineered by our secret government and used and so on and so forth. But beyond that, it is very interesting, the level of multidimensionality that enters into the experience with these other beings. Where you think they came from, I'm not sure. But in other words, they've got to come from somewhere. Okay, and I hope that you're not just positing that they come from the human unconscious.
No, I'm not at all. Because, I mean, let's get back to plasma. Plasma is a medium, just in the same way that we need air to breathe. I think that certain intelligences that manifest need plasma to exist. And I say this in the knowledge that a lot of work into plasma physics cutting edge work that's going on at the moment seems to suggest that we might be looking at quite separate life forms existing within plasma environments. Now, where do they come from if they suddenly just exist? Well, I think that they're interpenetrating through the plasma from something that's beyond normal space-time, some kind of higher dimensional realm. And I'd say that this might sound completely, new age or cookie, but it's not. This is exactly what theoretical physicists are suggesting. David Baum's work is absolutely crucial to understanding this. But more than this, I mean, going all the way back to people like Nikola Tesla, he also was seeing intelligences associated with what he would see in that terms as electricity. We call it as plasma today. It's a medium, it's merely a medium. But of course then we've got what we call entanglement in quantum theory, the idea that particles can be linked both through space and time, at any distance, that if they split apart, they can retain instantaneous contact. And this isn't just single particles, we're talking about an infinite amount of particles everywhere all the time. And this not only is the explanation behind things like telepathy, maybe mind over matter, teleportation, possibly even the future of computing. There are now quantum computing based on entanglement or non-locality, as it's known, non-local communication. But it's also the means by which life forms can travel from one environment to another. I mean, if you've got plasma only exists at a temporary level. I mean, if you've got a ball of light or an oval of light or whatever come into existence, you say, well, okay, I can accept that it's intelligent, but where does that intelligence go once the light goes out? Well, the idea is it withdraws back into a more intricate realm, what you call the ether, the ancient Greeks called the plenum, and that here it can move instantaneously and then inhabit new plasma environments. And quite clearly this could be local to the other one that's just gone out, like one light goes out, another one comes on, it could be the same intelligence. Or, quite clearly, it could be on the other side of the universe, and backwards and forwards in time. That beyond our own concepts of space-time, anything can happen, anything can be going on. Our mind can influence the past can influence us, we can influence the future can influence us. That's time, but what can also happen in space? If we can influence space in, both in forward and backwards in the same way, that relationship can be with intelligences anywhere in the universe. So when we're talking about these life forms existing within these plasmas, it doesn't mean that they're of the Earth. They could be of the Earth. Maybe that there are those that are local to us, but equally they could come from the opposite end of the universe, possibly even from parallel realms, as you suggested.
Okay. Well, what about the notion that maybe another way of saying what you're saying is where time-space and space-time cross.
That's the here and now. I mean, we create our own realities. I mean, each one of us, has our own reality, and that's not just a worldview, but everything centered. We're like a centre spot outwards. That the whole of the universe, the whole of space-time, for each individual is almost like a point of consciousness. So we can influence anything. Whatever we believe can exist. If we believe in lizard-headed aliens, they exist. If we believe in alien greys, they exist. If we don't believe in them, we might find evidence they don't exist. But others could introduce us to new evidence that, in other words, whatever people want to believe does exist. But in a way that worries me slightly, because if we can make up reality, then what are we bringing into existence with our own physical plane? If we do believe, for instance, that lizard-headed aliens are trying to enslave the human race, can we make that a reality? Can we make that an actual eventuality in this world? I hope not. I hope there is a possibility that we can see UFOs and the intelligences behind them on a much brighter level and perhaps change things.
Okay, but the trouble is that, you know, from the outside, listening to you, it sounds a little bit too relativistic in the way you're talking.
Yeah.
And I would posit that there's more to realities than simply whether or not we believe in them.
But I mean, it comes back to this key word, entanglement. You know, if we can influence both space and time, you know, I mean, who's to say that we can't, that some part of us, some part of our mind, some part of our belief can't influence the primeval soup on some other planet 1 million years ago, and actually cause the creation of life forms 1 million years ago on another planet that evolves in a certain way, so that now, in the here and now of our space-time, it can come looking for its creator, us. It's possible. I mean, yeah, these are thought experiments.
Yes.
I don't want the viewers to take all this totally seriously, but these are new ideas which I want to throw around and see where we go.
I see. Okay, well, fair enough. And let me ask you this: how do you account for something like the Bermuda Triangle?
I account for it because there are a lot of cases where the aircraft and ships have just vanished. And a colleague of mine, Greg and Laura Little, have been looking at a number of they've been going around the Bahamas looking at wrecks, and they found a number of the aircraft that classically gone missing in the Bermuda Triangle. They've traced them, they've traced their numbers, they've had film crews with them, and more are being discovered. That's all right, that's fine. Maybe they got into storms or hurricanes or whatever else and just went missing. Having said this, there are a lot of accounts of some kind of mysterious mist that seems to be luminous, that planes, ships seem to go into and experience something. I mean, a classic example was in 1904. A ship by the name of the Mohican was travelling from Romania into Philadelphia, and about 250 miles offshore, this rolling mist, like a large balloon, came across the sea, and it seemed to be described as an electric cloud, and it enveloped the whole ship, and all of the crew found that they couldn't move their arms and legs. Before this onset, they tried to move metal objects and found they were stuck to the deck. The compass just span wildly, and the whole of the ship seemed to be alive with like this electric light, like sort of plasma or St Elmo's fire, as described classically by a lot of ship's crews. And then as quickly as it came, after maybe, I don't know, a short time, 15 minutes, half an hour, it then left the ship, and everything went back to normal. So what was going on here? Well, these type of clouds, I mean, a colleague of mine, Jenny Randalls, has written a whole book called Time Storms, and she said that she has done investigations on cases of this all around the world, and these are often mistaken, if you like, for UFOs, and they seem to be associated with time warps, abduction experiences, complete distortions in space and time, in exactly the manner that I described of the family from Aveley in West Essex also possibly encountered something like this. Not exactly the same as this ship that I've been talking about, the Mohican, but they went into one of these time storms, if I can use that term. I mean, they described it as a luminous bank of green mist or fog or gas, and when they went into it, all of the hairs stood on end. This was exactly what the crew of the Mohican described as well, and crops up again and again and again with UFO cases. There's no question what this is. It's an electrostatic charge, and in plasma environments, that's what's necessary to bind together the electron seeds. That's what they are. I mean, that they're contained overall by magnetic fields. But I mean, don't see this as purely something like physics, because all this is a medium for something to manifest through. Something which would be described as interpenetrating our world. And I'll give you a description. A glove If you've got a glove, you wear a glove. But before you wear the glove, it's just a piece of fabric. I'm alright, it may have a certain shape, but it's just a piece of fabric, woven or whatever, maybe rubber or whatever. If you put your hand in it, you put your hand through it, you penetrate into it, it's animated and it becomes, real, it becomes alive.
Right.
And we're talking about the same type of thing here.
Well, this was shown in the movie The Deep. You remember The Deep, where you take where the water comes up and it's actually in the shape of sort of a creature that they see underwater, right? So that's very much of a graphic representation of exactly what you're talking about. What I'd like to know is whether or not you're familiar with the Philadelphia experiment.
Absolutely.
And how you sort of, I don't know, figured that out in terms of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
How do you correlate that?
Well, I loved the story of the Philadelphia experiment. I read Charles Burlett's book, and was it William Moore, I believe, was the other co-author. I've read about it in other books previously. The main person who spilled the beans on it was a guy called Carlos Allende, and he told the story to a UFO writer by the name of Maurice K. Jessup, and it's a famous story. I mean, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that it didn't happen, I'm afraid. Recently, a claimed survivor of the vessel, the USS Eldridge, came forward and said, yes, I was there, I saw it all. But countering that is the fact that the members of the crew of the USS Eldridge actually have a yearly get-together, and they laugh and joke about, the whole Philadelphia experiment, saying it was far more interesting than what we remember. So it's the case. The verdict is out on whether this actually took place. But what I can say is that the story that I've told you about the Mohican was almost certainly the forerunner of the Philadelphia experiment. In fact, some researchers have actually even suggested that the whole idea was based on the story of the Mohican from 1904, which I find really fascinating, because here you've got almost the same thing going on, and I understand from from researchers that there may have been even more to this case than there was published at the time in the newspapers. So even if the Philadelphia experiment turns out to have been a hoax, it was possibly based on a very real incident that occurred in 1904.
Okay. Well, are you familiar with the Montauk experiments?
Of course.
And I mean, there's so many witnesses that are talking about this, and the idea is also has to do with what progress has been made from there on in regard to what you might call time travel or dealing with shifting timelines. And all of this is cutting edge research that's being done at this time.
Yeah. I mean, my honest answer to that is I have absolutely no idea whether the Montauk story is real or not. I'd love to think it was. Maybe parts of it are hoax, maybe some of it's real, I don't know. All I can say is that it comes back to what I said earlier about making up your own reality. And I'm not saying that flippantly, but what I mean by that is that what we buy into, I believe that we can find evidence for, and it becomes real. Which is why, skeptics exist. I mean, skeptics will basically find evidence to disprove whatever. Of course they will. Whereas those that believe will always find evidence for that theory or idea or story or whatever that's gone on. So which is right? They're both right. Because as I said, reality is essentially as you make it. It's not all the same. There is not just one reality. I believe that we all create our own reality. We're all like cogs in this great system that probably exists beyond space-time. And most people assume that those cogs all interlink and all run together. They're all linked. They're at different speeds, but basically, what if the cogs are not connected? What if those cogs are turning and they're not actually connected? I mean, this is a possibility. I think that we need to start looking at reality in a different way. I mean, what I see through my eyes, what the viewer sees through their eyes, what they're viewing now as they look at this interview, that's their personal reality. And, that's something which I think that they can influence. I mean, some people are going to reject what I say, some people are going to think this is some great, cool ideas. But, hey, that's what life's about, I think.
Okay, but how do you know, there's still a problem in terms of the fact that we have physical entities entering this reality that are not human.
Yeah, I've no problem with that.
And it has nothing to do with whether you believe in them or not.
Yeah.
They still exist
Yeah.
independent
Yeah.
of your belief.
But the thing is that, as I said, that doesn't mean that if my reality can't impinge on other people. You know, I've just given a lecture about Göbekli Tepe, the oldest temple in the world. I've imposed my ideas on an audience of hundreds. Now, those people will go away and check it, and some will validate what I said, and some will go away and say, I think you're wrong. But I've just imposed my reality on other people, and if people, you know, take that in and allow it to become part of their reality, then it's real. You know, I mean, and I think that's the way things exist, and we influence the past, we influence the future. All of these influence us. Who knows what's influencing us at this very moment from the future, maybe.
Well, that I will agree with, but what I'm wondering is where do you draw the line? Because there is these independent cogs, as you say.
Yeah.
Maybe in 3D they appear independent, but as you leave this 3D reality, this level of reality, there's no doubt whatsoever that there is a link up, that eventually, you know, whether you believe in God or whatever you want to call it, there's a creator or there's a source, which is probably maybe the best word for it, that it all ultimately comes from. And so there is a link up anyway above this reality, so that things like, for example, the tsunami that just happened in Japan, this is happening on this planet. It also washed in on, you know, I mean, it was threatening my house in theory, you know, on the Pacific coast. It didn't get that far, but it did get to the Santa Cruz harbor, and, you know, was impacting some of the ships in the harbor there. In other words, this is very real. This is a linked reality. We're experiencing it simultaneously.
We can only change what is basically unseen. I mean, this word inevitability is very important on defining what reality is. You know, it's inevitable that if I go outside into the auditorium, I'm going to meet certain people. You know, it's inevitable that one day I'm going to die. You know, and that in itself creates a framework of reality. You know, it's inevitable. That which is not inevitable, I think, can be changed. I mean, for instance, if I talked about Nikola Tesla and said that, you know, a psychic said to me, oh, he had a secret diary. Now, there is a possibility that he didn't keep a secret diary, but the sheer fact that a group of people start believing that he did could, I believe, influence him back in time to start one up, so that when you start looking into evidence for it, you will eventually find it, and that will be the confirmation of that reality.
Okay, well, that's a very interesting way of looking at reality, for sure. I mean, there is no doubt that that in some ways the future does influence the past, and vice versa. Okay, and this moment, you know, whether you, and I assume you do. I mean, in some philosophies, they would say there is nothing else but the now, ultimately. But our view of time, future, past, and present, is actually, that linear thing is actually circular and simultaneous. So in essence, that we are always in the now. This philosophy or theory that you're espousing here has every possibility of being true, right? And I've also talked, you know, this is probably crazy to bring even into this interview, but you know, Jack Sarfati is a physicist and is quite well known. Apparently, you know his work. He often talks about the idea that the future influences the present and the past. And we had a dialogue on email at one point in which I said that I have a theory that sometimes when I wake up in the morning, that I can tell what that day is going to be like, because I can tell by looking at my face what my reaction to the day was. In other words, it's already happened.
Absolutely.
So it's fascinating.
Yeah, you've got it. And I mean, there are various scientific experiments that have been done to see if we can influence the future, projecting the mind forward let's say, a day or a year to try and influence instrumentation. And I've tried this with a group myself, and it seems to work. That's the bizarre thing. So it's not that difficult to influence the future. You know, and the trouble is that in a way it's worrying and disturbing, because it starts evoking ideas that all the monsters that we thought existed when we were kids, and you know, which is why we didn't turn the light out. And yet our parents tell us, no, everything's okay, it's all fine. Maybe they just do exist, or can exist on occasions. And I think that the Large Hadron Collider, the team behind that announced recently that they would have evidence of higher dimensions within the year. For them to have made that statement, it means that they must have some kind of foundation. You know, in other words, they've already got results, because otherwise they might as well say, you know, we're going to have evidence that the moon's made of green cheese within a year.
Right.
Clearly, they've already got something. And when that evidence is presented, then a lot of people are going to be worried about reality, because what the scientists tell us could happen when other dimensions come into play is going to make the world very wobbly, and it will be up to, you know, almost the skeptics to say, you know, look, no, don't worry, this, that and the other's not going to happen, because, you know, although those monsters can exist, they can only exist on special occasions, basically. They're not exist all the time, because, you know, reality is mutable. But to be honest, as I said, that word of inevitability is important. You know, it's inevitable that if I try and run through that wall, I'm going to get hurt, and that's it. But it's when things are not inevitable, that's when they can be changed.
Okay. Well, I have to say though that if you watched Men Who Stare at Goats, you know that you can eventually, if you get your mind in the right framework, run through that wall and not be hurt.
But I think I would probably hurt myself if I tried.
So it's not inevitable.
Yeah.
And that's where
But you see where I'm coming from, that, you know, it's not just a case of believing that you can walk reality. You know, it's a case of doing so in a way which is inevitable. You know, in other words, that you have to take out the fixed reality to do it. This is what I said about the Tesla, you know, thought experiment there.
Well, you have to also, I would say, there has to be, reality is an agreement, okay, among us.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
And so that walking through that wall, at this moment, on this, you know, on this plane that we agreed exists here with this plant and so on and so forth. In other words, we're working in this construct as souls, non-physical entities that are manifesting here for a purpose in a game field that we've agreed upon. And if we decide to change the field itself, that's going to take a lot of us to do. Probably.
Absolutely.
There needs to be link-ups that make that sort of powerful, and we are working at changing consciousness to make that possible.
Yeah.
In other words, to make peace possible, for example, in this game construct we call this existence.
But I think that this is why I say that we have to be careful about what we believe, because what we believe can come true. And, you know, if we believe that the future of the human race, you know, will be enslaved by lizard-headed aliens, that could well happen. But if we see, you know, the phenomena and the intelligences behind UFOs on a much more positive light, we can change that, because it's not inevitable that we're going to be enslaved yet. So we can change the future.
Okay. All right, Andrew Collins, we're going to have to continue this at a later date, but thank you very much. You're a very interesting individual, and I enjoyed talking to you.
Very much. I mean, I'm a writer, I'm a researcher, and you know, I can find the information where I need and when I need it. And in recent times I've been seriously going into quantum science, quantum theory, particularly the work of the theoretical physicist David Bohm, who was onto the whole idea of multidimensional experiences in connection with the medium that we call plasma. That's suggesting that the fourth dimension is a separate place, like the Earth or our physical dimension is a place that exists and you can travel from A to B. I think what you've referred to as a fourth dimension is something that's created as and when necessary. In other words, the dimensions beyond the three normal space and one of time uncurl into existence when necessary. So cutting edge work's going on at the moment seems to suggest that we might be looking at quite separate life forms existing within plasma environments. Now, where do they come from if they suddenly just exist? Well, I think that they're interpenetrating through the plasma from something that's beyond normal space-time, some kind of higher dimensional realm. And I'd say that this might sound completely, you know, new age or cookie, but it's not.
Hi, I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I am here with Andrew Collins, and we are at Megalithomania in South Africa, and I'm very happy to be able to interview Andrew. I've been trying to catch up with him for quite some time, and we're going to have some thunderstorm activity in the background, so if you hear rolling thunder, you know what's going on, and it's all good. And so, what I'd like to do here is, Andrew, have you sort of give yourself an introduction and talk about what brought you into this whole subject area. Really go back to your even your childhood if necessary, and give us a little personal background.
Well, I think I probably began my interest with UFOs when I was a child. I had an interest in aircraft, and I saw a strange ball of light across the sky one day, and I thought that this was perhaps even more interesting than the aircraft that I was trying to view and spot at that time. And so I started to read what I could, and as a child there wasn't that much around, and then other interests took over my life, and it wasn't until I started work at the age of 16 that I started gorging paperbacks on UFOs from the likes of Brad Steiger, Jax Valley, John Keel, people like this. And it sort of almost took over my life, really, because I wanted to get close to the subject. I wanted to, to communicate with these entities. And so I became a UFO investigator for the British UFO Research Association, started interviewing people that had seen things, and that's where it all began. And very quickly I realised, obviously, that 90% of UFO sightings have some kind of explanation, but those that didn't were very, very interesting, because the people involved in them seem to have certain characteristics that are similar to each other, not just personalities, but they often seem to be psychic, they often seem to have physiological traits in common, they would have past lives that were quite similar, and I started to look more at this than the actual phenomena itself, because I felt that the people were the key to the phenomena as much as what they were seeing. And as all this was taking place, the type of cases I was covering were getting more and more involved, close encounters at first, close encounters of the second kind, and finally close encounters of the third kind, and even fourth. And until eventually, in 1977, when I was aged 20, I was lucky enough to be put in touch with the first ever witnesses to an abduction in the UK. And this was a family by the name of Day, D-A-Y, from West Essex, so that's just outside of Greater London. And they were going along a road at night, short journey, they saw an oval blue light crossing in front of them, and they saw this, accepted it was a UFO, it disappeared, and then they turned the corner and the car headlights failed, they could no longer hear the tyres, the engine failed, and in front of them there's this luminous bank of green mist, glowing green mist, and they ploughed into that and everything went completely hazy. The next thing they know, they're 3/4 of a mile further along the road, and they get home from this short journey and find that 3 hours are missing from their lives. The whole case was investigated over about a year-long period, and the standard on-board scenario came out during hypnosis, and this really sort of set the standard in the UK. I mean, before that time, it was only really foreign cases like Betty and Barney Hill, and a guy called, I think it was Herb Schreimer, in 1974, and that happened in the USA. Plus, there was a few really strange cases, obviously from South America, and this really primed me. I think this was at the point that I really started to write about UFOs, and I also realised that there was a paranormal psyche element here, because the family changed dramatically after the encounter. They became vegetarians, could start seeing auras, could see energies out of sight, also strange apparitions, tall dark figures seen at night. And I can confirm that this was real, because on more than one occasion I saw poltergeist activity, or heard it I should say, going on when I was on my own in there downstairs one night, sleeping overnight there.
So you actually went there to investigate?
Yeah, but I became very close friends with them as well, and I'm still friends with the male of the family, John, day to day. And there's no question this event took place, and that I started to try and get deeper into this, because the onboard experience was quite classic, but there seemed to be some conflicting things going on, because the family had 3 children. 2 of them were asleep in the car, and the third one, when he saw the oval blue light, got up and held on to the front seats, and that's the position he was in when they went into the green mist. He was still in that position when they came out. The 2 other children were still asleep in the back. It was as if time had disappeared completely. So in other words, it didn't seem as if they'd spent 3 hours somewhere. The whole thing had happened in an instant of time. That's not to say they didn't have an abduction experience. That occurred, but it occurred outside of normal space-time. And this got me thinking that maybe the abduction experiences may be a lot more complex than the simple idea that you've got a nuts and bolts spacecraft and somebody goes aboard and they're then put back afterwards. That you're dealing here with something that's